Hello, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at a presentation given at the Wiki-Me-dia Foundation, which is a nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to encouraging the growth, development, and distribution of free, multilingual educational content, and to providing the full content of these wiki-based projects to the public free of charge. So basically, these are the people in charge of Wikipedia and a dozen or so other wiki knowledge bases. And our speaker is Asaf Bartov, a senior program officer for emerging communities at Wiki-Me-dia. The presentation in question is titled, "What Can We Learn from the Feminist Movement for Knowledge Equity?" Now, knowledge equity is a term that I can't recall ever having heard before. Being literal, I assume it means something to the effect of equal access to knowledge, which makes sense for Wiki-Me-dia, given the easy and public availability of things like Wikipedia. But I am honestly stumped as to what a gender-based ideology, this generation's iteration of which is a fractured, confused, and contradictory kaleidoscope of theories and complaints, would have to do with making knowledge accessible to all. So, let's try and figure that out together, shall we?
So, very briefly, in case anyone wandered into this room without knowing what feminism is, Wikipedia says feminism is a range of political movements, ideologies, and social movements that share a common goal to define, establish, and achieve political, economic, personal, and social equality of sexes. The word women is not in this definition, I want you to notice.
Okay, sure. In that definition, there isn't. But the word women is present in many other definitions. So, is the absence of the word women in your definition supposed to mean something profound? Why even call it feminism if it's all-inclusive? Why not call it genderism? Or, even easier, why not just operate under egalitarianism? In fact, isn't egalitarianism more applicable than feminism when it comes to the notion of knowledge equity?
That movement has pursued many struggles and many aspects of lacking equality. I will name just a few to exercise your imagination in case you're mostly thinking about voting rights, for example. Well, yes, voting rights famously, but also property and inheritance rights, equal pay, equal terms, that is equal treatment, equal employment opportunities, equal access to education, something that obviously resonates very much for us, reproductive rights, freedom from harassment.
Okay, you had me up until freedom from harassment, because the idea of what equates to harassment these days has become so ambiguous as to make merely speaking to or about a woman some sort of verbal attack, or even a crime. Also, for touting that your definition did not include the word women, it's funny that your list there only concerns women.
And recognition and representation in art and history. These terms I have bolded, I hope have obvious relevance to our work.
Not being a wiki editor, I'll just have to take your word for it. But a side question, if I might digress for a moment, I have to wonder if feminism is the official ideology of Wiki-Me-dia.
And even men's liberation. I, again, point this out in case some people think this is all good, but largely about women. It isn't. Feminism is also men's liberation.
Really? Well, okay, I stand corrected. As you did with women, please list for me all of the things that feminism has done to help liberate men.
Okay, so I want to offer you 3 lessons.
Oh, so feminism promotes men's liberation, you're just not going to tell us how. Got it.
That I see out of many things that we could learn from the feminist movement. The first lesson is the problem is real and some people need convincing.
The problem is real and some people need convincing. Well, one would think that if the problem, whatever the problem is, was so obvious, no convincing would be necessary. The problem would be self-evident. But, okay, what is the problem? What is your evidence for the problem? And how do we solve said problem?
And Professor Rode suggests that a major issue is that most people believe the world is basically just. Yes, there are deviances from justice, but basically it is just. Basically the world is set up in a way that works for most people. Basically the way things are is the way things should be. It's a natural, apparently, tendency of humans to accept status quo, to accept the world as they encounter it.
Well, I suppose it depends on what part of the world you're talking about. A fat and happy Canadian probably has a different take on things as compared to an impoverished person in Bangladesh. But, okay, for the sake of argument, let's say that most people think life and the world is pretty much an open field, depending on what choices you make, and barring acts of God and such.
And to sustain this belief, to maintain this comfortable belief, this comforting belief, people are willing to alter their assessments of merit, of what is good and bad, and even to retroactively justify existing social arrangements. So, for example, we always hear that women are still not paid equally, even in the West, even in the US. The figure of 70 cents for the dollar is often mentioned.
Ah, yes. The wage gap. A conspiracy of men and society to outright disallow women from making money by literally paying them less than men because they're women. It's not at all an earnings gap, wherein the 70 cents on the dollar figure reflects a combination of education, career choice, hours worked, and includes all women, even those who have either dropped out of or reduced their footprint in the economy due to raising a family or making other choices in their lives. And taking all of those factors into account, the wage gap then shrinks to something like a 5-cent difference, which could indeed include actual sexism and discrimination to account for some portion of that, though how much or how little of it we really cannot know. Do you mean that wage gap?
And then people, instead of saying that is horrible and unjust and how are we even living in this society still, it's 2018.
It's the current year?
People try to find some things to explain, excuse, justify, well, women have children, they have pregnancies, maybe they're promoted less. I mean, all kinds of
researched and valid factors?
Things, instead of sticking to the upsetting conclusion that this is not just and this is not okay. It's easier to just come up with some explanation that makes it, oh, yeah, well, that explains it.
It's easier to come up with a thoughtful, researched, and objective explanation than it is to just be irrationally outraged that it is unjust. Got it.
And so this is what Professor Rode calls the no problem problem. We have the problem that most people don't understand there is a problem. And for many, and maybe most, I'm not sure, I don't have the research to back that up.
Oh, so this entire tirade of yours is based on opinion and conjecture, not facts. Got it.
For many Wikipedians, the existence of systemic bias and the effective, even if unintended, exclusion of minorities and marginalized people and knowledge is either not a problem or not their problem. I'm not sure, I don't have the research to back that up. So people who say there is no problem, no knowledge is marginalized, there's no people barred from editing, etc., I would divide them into two groups. The first and large group are the naive, right?
Right.
People who literally don't know, don't see that there's a problem. They're not willfully pretending there is no problem. They truly don't see there is a problem, probably because of a narrowness of experience. They've never met anyone not like them, they've never traveled, they've never seen how the rest of the world lives. All kinds of reasons like that could get someone to have the natural, naive assumption, everybody's like me, everybody should have the same opportunities as me, etc. So I can do it, why can't anyone else? There is no problem. I'm not sure, I don't have the research to back that up. But there is a small group who are willfully asserting there is no problem. And those would be people who are actually invested and interested in the status quo remaining and not changing at all, whether because they have opinions, bigoted opinions, racist opinions, sexist opinions, and whether because, I don't know, they're terrible people and like to see people frustrated or suffer.
So, sociopaths? And also, are you saying that anyone who doesn't think that there is a problem, or at least not as much of a problem as you say there is, are horrible people because they don't agree with you? 'Cause that sounds like an awfully bigoted perspective.
But that is definitely the minority. There is a very large group of people who are naive, who need to be taught, who need to be shown that there is a problem, and the naive people who think there is no problem could be shown.
Convert now, or fall forever.
These are the people we can convince. Now then there's the people who say, yes, there is a problem, but we have no responsibility for causing it. That's just how it is. We didn't make the world, we didn't make the situation. We didn't decide to discriminate against minorities or women. I'm not sure, I don't have the research to back that up. Or have any responsibility to fix it. Even if we didn't cause it, do we have any responsibility to fix it?
Well, I don't know. Why don't you tell us more about whose responsibility it is to fix a problem that they didn't cause, but are helping to perpetuate, even though you have no research on who or how many people that is, based entirely on a belief in the unjust, the dismissal of contrary evidence, and the vilification of anyone who does not share your opinion.
Just as a quick example, the people opposing slavery in the United States in the 19th century, the abolitionists, they did not invent slavery, right?
Right.
It was invented centuries before. They did not bring the slaves from Africa. Does that mean they did not have a responsibility to end it? Think about that.
Did they have a responsibility to do that? No, they didn't. The whole idea at the time was so controversial that it helped to fuel a civil war. Now, was the abolitionist movement a moral good? Of course it was. But then, the practice of slavery was not a matter of opinion or belief, but an observable fact in law and custom. And unlike the manifest reality of slavery, you have not provided any evidence to prove that anything that you're citing as a problem is actually a problem and not simply the result of free choice. Also, retreating to the extreme example of slavery as though it were somehow an equivalent to whatever you are pitching here is pretty cheap. But hey, that's just my opinion. So, I guess I'm one of those terrible people now, aren't I?
So whether or not you're responsible for a problem is orthogonal, is not necessarily related to whether you have some responsibility for fixing it.
I have a problem with people making vast claims about reality without offering any evidence. Is it your responsibility to fix that problem by any chance?
And so you hear people saying, yes, we are for inclusivity, equity in principle, but then you hear them dismiss one after another all the practical proposals that could do something about it. Yes, we have a gender participation problem on Wikipedia, but this idea won't work, and this project's too expensive, and we couldn't possibly do this, so that's just how it is.
Well, are any of those counterpoints incorrect? Or unreasonable? I have no idea, unless you give us some details and active examples. Dare I even hope for such things?
And I would like to specifically call out, for those of you who are English Wikipedians, you may have encountered this acronym, this shortcut for the policy section that says Wikipedia does not exist to right great wrongs, right? To correct great wrongs. And that is indeed a guideline on Wikipedia, meaning, you know, if, I don't know, someone was wrongly convicted of murder and it's really unjust and you know, this person didn't do it, don't come to Wikipedia to fight for this person's innocence, you know, go to the courts, appeal, whatever. Wikipedia is not the place to correct any and all injustice. And that is correct. That is a reasonable policy for Wikipedia. But I found in several discussions that people cite this policy for systemic issues. When people bring up, for example, minority participation or indigenous knowledge, they say, well, yeah, it kind of sucks that this knowledge isn't on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia doesn't correct the world, doesn't fix great wrongs. And I think that is a misapplication of that policy.
Indigenous knowledge. Okay, I have often heard that term, but I am still uncertain what it means. If it involves observable and objective facts about the world, then I suppose it does have a place on an endeavor like Wikipedia. If it's just a collection of folklore and myth, well, there's already a place for such things on Wikipedia, or any reputable encyclopedia, really, as well. So, I'm still not sure what indigenous knowledge is, or why not including it is inherently wrong.
Because this bias is taking away from our neutrality. Wikipedia should be neutral. That means it should be unbiased.
Well, trust me, if you are a senior program officer at Wiki-Me-dia, I am sure that Wikipedia is anything but unbiased.
Lesson number 2, and this will be much briefer.
Somehow I doubt that. I had to jump about 20 minutes worth of additional nonsense just to get to Lesson 2. And I did watch all of that, but Lesson 1 never seemed to pay off. Now, if you would like to see the full presentation, a link is in the description.
Documentation matters. Let's play a quick game.
Oh boy. A game.
Please name 5 classical music composers. Bach. Mozart. What? Beethoven. Next. Brahms. Sorry, what? Arvo Pärt. Excellent. Arvo Pärt. Yes, 5 classical music composers. Now name 1 classical music composer who was a woman. Thank you.
Well, that wasn't very difficult.
Anyone else?
Anyone else? You said to name only 1.
Now name 1 classical music composer who was a woman. Clara Schumann. Very good. Very good. Why do we know about Clara Schumann? Because she was married to Robert Schumann. Unfortunately. So, anyone else?
You said to only name one.
Female classical music composers? Yeah. Yeah. So here's some help. Fanny Mendelssohn, also from the Mendelssohn musical family, Hildegard of Bingen, and she's remembered, I think, mostly because of the religious significance. But there were others, Francesca Caccini, Barbara Strozzi, and quite a few women composed classical music from the Baroque onwards.
So, female classical composers weren't a complete rarity. Got it.
Why was this so hard?
Why was this so hard?
Now name one classical music composer who was a woman. Thank you.
Your question was asked and answered in under 3 seconds. It was not hard at all, apparently. Though, I am thinking that you created this part of your presentation assuming the ignorance of your audience, which is why you immediately moved the goalposts and then went back on script, continuing as though your audience had struggled with your challenge of knowledge. This says far more about you than it does the problem.
Why was this so hard? We have a whole room here. Why was this so hard?
Again, it was not hard for the quote-unquote whole room there. Someone answered your question immediately. And so we are going to skip the next few minutes wherein our speaker attempts to recover from his absolutely failed gotcha moment.
And finally, and with this I'll end, the importance of allies versus opponents in the silent majority.
Ah, allyship. Yes, tell me about the need for allies in Wikipedia.
Dominating cultures and dominating norms usually have the force of numbers, but those numbers don't come from active oppressors or members of the privileged elite, but from the silent cooperation of the majority. Most men have not, certainly today, do not conspire to oppress women. Most men merely put up with it.
Most men don't conspire. Most men put up with it. All right, so how many men do actually conspire to oppress women? Oh, wait, why am I asking you?
I'm not sure, I don't have the research to back that up. Allies to marginalized groups would be the key to resist such domination and to increase equity. Without allies, we wouldn't have the numbers. We've heard about the importance of encouragement from previous speakers and the importance of invitation and accommodation of difference. Our wikis have, as I said, bigots, sexists, racists, because they're a large group of humans and all large groups of humans have them. But those are always a minority themselves. Bigotry succeeds only with the silent assent of non-bigots. Only.
Well, I suppose you're right, which is partially why I make videos, so that I am not silent regarding speakers like yourself.
And whether because, I don't know, they're terrible people and like to see people frustrated or suffer. And so, if you have privilege, you should use it. Use your privilege.
Well, thank you for your permission to do so. But tell me, what would be the correct way to use my privilege were I to have any?
By acting as allies, acting, not just having the right opinions.
The right opinions. Got it.
We can help bring about equity. Especially the more unequal a situation is, the more important privileged allies are to making any progress. So if you have privilege, either real-world privilege like permanent access to the internet or money, or wiki privilege like not so much admin status, simply community status, reputation, experience with edits, I think is much more important. Please use it and help us all, not just the marginalized groups, because helping marginalized knowledge and marginalized groups helps everyone.
All right, all fine and good. People should actively use their privilege to promote and broadcast the right opinions. Though I can't help but get the feeling that we're reaching some kind of payoff to this presentation. So let's move on to that, shall we?
You might say, well, you probably are a privileged Wikipedian, right?
Right?
You've been around forever, etc. Why don't you do it? And the answer is, I do. And I try even things like this. Just a few months ago, I tried to make, and this is my last example, I realize we're running out of time. I tried to make this small change to English Wikipedia's notability page. And the change I wanted to make is to add to the sentence that said, availability of secondary sources covering the subject is a good test for notability. Okay, the availability of sources itself is a good test for notability, full stop. That's what it said. I added, it is a good test for notability if the subject's culture or country is generally well covered in secondary literature.
Uh-huh. Well, okay. It seems a bit superfluous to me. I mean, the original sentence says the subject ambiguously, so no further clarification of culture/country is really needed, is it? And what does generally well covered mean? Who sets that metric? So, yeah, it reads to me as an unnecessary addition. But hey, that's just my opinion. I wonder if I have the right one.
But I was reverted. I thought this is a perfectly reasonable qualification to make to this. I didn't set out to really revolutionize notability. I just encountered that sentence and it rang false to me. So I made this change boldly, you know, as we do on Wikipedia. I was reverted. That's okay too.
Is it? Is it okay? Because you've made this an example in a section on allies versus opponents, wherein there are right opinions. Also, you sound just a little passive-aggressively bitter to me.
So I went to the discussion page and I explained what I just said, right?
Right?
I explained and I said, I think my change reflects this logic, but other established editors interpreted my proposed change as an attack on any limitation of notability, or that I proposed to accept all original research, which is simply not there in the text that I added, but that is how they interpreted it, and therefore said, when a country or other context does not have a literature of reliable sources, it's sad, but means that those topics are not notable by our standards, period. Or, it doesn't matter why references are or not available, only whether they are, period.
Uh-huh. Well, you win some, you lose some. What's the point of this, again?
And my favorite, for years the Wiki-Me-dia Foundation has been floating the idea of improving coverage of underrepresented cultures by allowing oral histories or other primary or unconventional sourcing. It always goes down like the Hindenburg, the Zeppelin.
The Zeppelin? Oh, thank God you clarified. Because I thought you meant Paul von Hindenburg, the president of the German Reich. Oh man, I was mightily confused. Please, go on.
Under assault by a battalion of flamethrower-wielding editors. I don't know why that metaphor, simile was necessary. But yeah, so this was welcomed. So with 7 supporters of my change and 10 against it, status quo remained. With more allies, we can have the numbers.
With more allies. Don't you mean sycophants? You want people who agree with your ideas. You want to end opposition to your ideas. Because here, you were a victim. Your idea was put out in the public arena, was discarded by a jury of your peers, and now, if only the majority had recognized your awesomeness, it would have been a blow to the status quo. There was no self-reflection on whether your idea might have been counterproductive or add unnecessary complication to the policy of notability. No, you are right, and they were wrong, because they were not allies with the right opinions, but rather opponents who are oppressing you. Yes, and now please, tell me what the word bigot actually means, and then please ask yourself if you might not be one. So yes, what can the feminist movement teach us about knowledge equity? Well, I'm not really sure, since this entire presentation seemed to be one big lead-in to a personal complaint from a sore loser. A sore loser who put forth a notion which the rest of the world found lacking in merit to become accepted practice. And only if there had been more allies with the same opinion, then that notion could be pushed into accepted practice against the whims of an objective majority. Well, wait. Maybe feminism is informing knowledge equity, which is a terrifying thought. Because when merely having differing opinions is what separates the good guys from the terrible people, the allies from the oppressors, and the feminists from the patriarchy, then a mere war of words becomes the least of our problems. As always, thank you for watching.